Yeah, I miss it.
Kick this thing off. In case you didn't know it, it's September 10th, Friday. There's our SmartMarket meeting. Some very, very exciting things happening at Materials Exchange this weekend. We are launching a upgraded version of our web interface. So here you can get a sneak peek of some screenshots. Our login is going to look like this. The big deal is what's on the right side here, a chat box. So you will be able to chat with someone here in the office right from the first page, and then move to, this is a new layout. Functionality is all basically the same. We just kind of made some order of the buttons and made it a little easier to look at by separating the rows, black and gray. And we moved some stuff around. So now if you want to add a line, there's an add button. But otherwise, all the functionality is the same. This is the buyer page. This is the seller page. Now, when you click on support, this box comes up and you can actually start a chat or give us a call. Oh, now I'm going to turn over to Ash real quick. Ashley is going to give us the market. What was going on this week, Ash?
Thanks, Mike. Let me make sure I'm on okay. Can you see me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, real quick, market is trying to get going. It was interesting. West Fraser made some kind of an announcement a week ago, but never actually put anything officially out until yesterday or the day before. So something about taking 30% off the market. When it actually came out, it was 5 to 10% they were going to take out over the third quarter. With the third quarter just about being over with, I would guess that most of that is priced into the market. Business is good in most places. From what I'm hearing, what's being held back is building because of some labor issues and other materials out there. I-joist seems to still be an issue, and a few other materials, some things like bathtubs, believe it or not, and things just to get things buttoned up.
You're all wet, Ash. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, exactly. So everyone is certainly talking the market up because generally when people get long a bunch of lumber, they talk the market up, and that's fine. I think we're turning more to a normalcy in the market. What I mean by that is historically over time, you'd have about $135 a thousand move over a whole year. We make those moves in 2 days now. So I think we're kind of returning to normal, more of a normalcy. And I know that won't make a lot of people happy that get long and want to make extreme returns, but maybe it'll be good for everybody else to figure out how to plan and forecast a little bit better. So we're going into the 2 slowest weeks for spruce products at the end of this month. And then we kind of go into a period where people start accumulating some things. I think on the secondary market, some people have already accumulated a lot. I can see from the banter going back on social media, but hopefully we turn to some normalcy and get some volume going. That's it, Mike.
You know, something I'd like to just highlight that's strange in the market is that September to November future spread.
Yeah, it's about as wide as it gets.
It's a record.
Yeah.
How wide it is ever. And it's on the radar of people outside the lumber industry. I got a call this morning from a fund out of Toronto, and they wanted to know if I could help them figure out a way to take delivery on September and make delivery into November. So you could sit and figure out why that, or come up with reasons why it is so wide. One reason for sure is that maybe there's a lot of wood on the ground in reloads and in places where you would store it normally. But $100 spread between September and November, that's a pretty significant spread. Really works out to be a 20% return in 2 months if you had convergence. It's kind of interesting. All right, we'll go back to my screen now, and we'll get to the guest, which I'm super excited about. Oh, I gotta go from the beginning. So with us today is Pete Kobelt. He is a CLT consultant, CLT, cross laminated timber. First thing we're going to chat about is Katerra. He was working at Katerra through pretty much their whole life cycle, and has some interesting business, how would you say it? How not to run a business potentially, things to talk about. And then, something near and dear to his heart is CLT. He's going to tell you what you need to know, what he sees happening with this particular building style or building product. And with that, I want to introduce everyone to Pete. Hello, Pete.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. It's good to see your smiling faces. Yeah, I've been on an interesting path. Michael, if you let me share, I'll
Please.
Put some images up.
Please do.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm just going to bounce around a little bit here and modify my story, but I have kind of a unique perspective on the industry, and spent 2.5 years at Katerra, which was really interesting. So I'll just give you a super quick background so you know who the heck I am, and then I'll delve into Katerra and then a little bit on CLT. So I'm fortunate enough to be a Swiss citizen just by virtue of my father, and I spent a lot of time in Europe studying the advances in mass timber. This happens to be my favorite bridge on one of the rivers. It was built in the 1300s and it's made out of timber. It's still standing. It's a pretty good testament. And so much of what I've learned from my European colleagues, which has been pretty cool because they're a good 20, 30 years ahead of us. So it's been I kind of have a unique perspective in being able to be very intimate with the pioneers over there and sort of having a sense of what's next for CLT over here, because I think it's going to keep expanding. That's a horribly stretched image of the first commercial CLT project. This is August of 2011 in little old Whitefish, Montana, where I was fortunate enough to live for 20 years. So we imported a building to see if this would work. We put this thing up in 4 days with 4 guys who've never touched a CLT panel. And it was a pretty stunning success, and it took us on a pretty cool path to SmartLam in Columbia Falls. We raised the money to build the first CLT plant in Columbia Falls, Montana, trying, as Judy just said, to use some of the abundant timber resources that were underutilized in Montana and sort of, open a new dialogue about value-added wood processing. And we were quite successful in making some good headway there. I went on and spent 2.5 years trying to get Katerra to go. This is the inside of a 250,000 square foot CLT plant in Spokane. They spent $170 million on this thing, and it has an output capacity of 185,000 cubic meters. So to put that in context, if the Europeans are approaching 2 million cubic meters combined output a year, you're talking about almost 10% of the combined European capacity in one single facility. So in classic Katerra form, they kind of, it was go big or go home. This facility has subsequently been purchased by Mercer International, a combined Canadian/European diversified wood products industry player. They seem like a really good candidate for this. Whether or not they really understand the complexity and nuances of running a CLT plant will have yet to be determined. I haven't had a chance to speak with them, but we've had a few emails back and forth. So it's good news for the industry that we've got continued, robust supply chain with somebody jumping right in and getting a screaming deal. I think they paid $50 million and the original was 170. So that's pretty exciting. I got a lot of dear friends working in that plant, and I was very pleased to see them stick around. The new kid on the block is Element5 here. This is in St. Thomas, Ontario, and they bought a automated European combined CLT and glulam production line from Leadneck. So probably an 8th or 10th version of that. I've been involved in some of the biggest projects in the US. These were in Arkansas. This was the largest student housing, 4,000 cubic meters of CLT and glulam, which got us on the radar with Walmart. And this is kind of an interesting story. I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I got hired by Walmart to reimagine a 4 million square foot campus in timber. And in a state like Arkansas, where they've got 19 million acres of trees and they grow 71 tons of wood fiber every 60 seconds. And in my presentation, I mentioned that we could regrow those buildings on the university campus in 3 hours, just in the state alone. And so we reimagined the entire campus in timber. And when they heard that statistic, they said, why can't we make this here using Arkansas Southern Pine? And lo and behold, we pulled off that mandate and lured Structurlam down to Conway, Arkansas. And maybe the craziest thing I've witnessed is the cheapest company on the planet writing a check for $45 million to build a CLT plant in Arkansas to close the deal with Structurlam, and then they'll divest themselves as they get their 50,000 cubic meter order out of that facility for, probably nice $50 million purchase order. Nice way to start your new plant in the U.S. So I hit this just because I think it's a bellwether of what's to come, and being on the inside with a lot of tech companies who are really driving internal climate scorecard and sustainability initiatives. They're building with timber, frantically. I've done 3 budgets on a 250,000 square foot data center. I mean, if you had told me just a few years ago, you'd be quoting data centers for the usual suspects, let's just leave it at that. In timber, I would have said, no, you've lost your mind. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But with them being really serious about reducing their carbon footprint and extracting high embodied energy materials out of the equation, they're doing it. And so, from Walmart to the big tech companies to the university campuses, all the way down to workforce housing. I'm doing a project in Montana where the developer is very conscientious of using sustainable materials. He's an owner operator, so he cares about building performance. All those things, really resonate. So, I mean, from, Class A office to student housing, all the way down to workforce housing, we're seeing timber emerge as a viable solution. These are 2 that I did at Katerra, and then I'll jump into Katerra. It was not easy.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, and anybody jump in. This is totally informal, so just tell me to shut up and I'll answer questions or whatever.
So, this building was going to be built anyway. It's built out of CLT. What is it displacing mostly?
Concrete and steel is where we can make the most compelling business case for a mass timber component or mass timber hybrid type system. You're never going to compete on an apples to apples basis with lowest common denominator construction like light wood frame, light gauge steel. That said, I'm looking at a lot of hybrid concepts to get more into multifamily, where we're doing framed light gauge steel, light wood frame walls, and just introducing a 5-ply, 170 mil thick CLT floor plate, and then pushing for prefab on the walls and all those components. So the whole thing is flown in with the same crane, and it's not fast CLT slow framing. Everything is fast. So this was cool because this was the first vertical expansion of its kind in the country, to my knowledge, on an existing building in a very high profile neighborhood, the Capital Riverfront District of Washington, D.C. A very tough jurisdiction. We needed a lot of help, massaging DRCA because they were still on 2015, and we wouldn't have been able to do this on 2015 code. So we asked them if we could use the provisions from 2021 code for tall wood if we didn't deviate from those whatsoever, and they agreed to that. The engineers were super helpful. It was ARA, as was Woodworks.
So one other quick question. If you're displacing concrete and steel, and this parlays into what Judy just asked about the labor side, it's obviously, like you said, about that building that went up in 4 days. These buildings go up pretty quickly. Are we displacing a labor force as well, or reducing the need for instance, a steel worker? Like when you erect these, are these who erects them? A carpenter or a steel worker? Coming from Chicago, the union wants to know.
Well, and Chicago's been pioneering a union effort to educate their framers in there in Chicago. They're working with timber, which I think is really smart. The answer is all of the above. Steel guys are great candidates to do installation. It's not about the panels, it's about the connections. So steel guys are great candidates. They've been flying in prefabricated components and screwing them together and bolting them together their whole lives. So the shift here is easy. Carpenters also, great candidates. You just need one experienced mass timber supervisor, and then he can show everybody else how they go together. I've even had, finally, instead of hearing the concrete guys whine about timber, I had a concrete guy come to me and say, hey, it occurred to me that we're there right before you guys, and then we come in right after you guys. Why couldn't we just do this and roll it all up into our scope? And I said, that's a great idea. It's here to stay. You guys can sit around and whine about it, or you can participate. So, finally, an innovative concrete guy thinking ahead how to create a competitive, sustainable position in the market. And it's a great idea.
What's the average labor savings and time savings, I guess, on the project?
It's, the way the industry is evolving is everything is a one-off. So everything is totally different. It's hard to compare, but, at Katerra with our 6-story, 120 by 240, dollar bill footprint building, 175,000 square feet, 85 feet and under. We were putting up the erected timber superstructure in 12 weeks with 8 guys. Labor fluctuates every market, depends on whether we're open shop or union or what have you. 20 to 30% reduction in schedule is pretty easy. And the timber crew is pretty lean because you're just working with one, unless you have 2 cranes. If you're doing a 250,000 square foot roof on a data center, you might want to put in 2 cranes. But you got 1 crane, so you really can only do so much. You're picking a panel every 10 minutes. If you're working with an 8 by 40, that's 320 square feet every 10 minutes. Look at the footprint of the building. You can calculate pretty closely how long it's going to take. And that's one of the cool things. The prefabrication, if you do the whole program right, it really delivers for the installation, because the precision of the panels, having come through a CNC machine that can split a millimeter in half, the precision and the tolerances are just phenomenal. So the experience that the installers have tends to be really, really positive. They turn right around and say, where's the next one? And what some of the things we were doing at Katerra, I guess this is a good segue. This is another one that happens to be just an hour south of me. The Fastenal got really excited about this and pumped all their own hardware and screws and fasteners and tapes and branded every single bolt that was exposed. So it's a pretty cool building. University campuses, as I mentioned. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is if one of the things that we were doing at Katerra was furthering the prefabrication, right? And this is one of the good ideas. So the summary on Katerra, this is, we could go on for hours about this. I'll try to keep it tight. The summary at Katerra was that they had a lot of fundamentally transformative and sound ideas on embracing prefabrication, embracing mass timber, and productizing, all these different typologies, so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time, and then using a factory for precision and speed and comfort and all the advantages of putting a roof over a construction site. But as we learned, just putting a roof over a construction site doesn't take out all the challenges. And so, one of the things that I was interested in is if we're going to embrace prefabrication like we're doing with CLT, why would we stop there? Like, let's keep going. Let's keep adding value. And so this is just one small, simple example of furthering the prefabrication and putting together a single lift for the job. This happened to be a net zero energy building, so the buildup was quite serious, quite thick to achieve that net zero energy rating. So they had great ideas across multiple areas, but tried to do too much too quickly across all these things, and then didn't empower the subject matter experts that had been hired to really do their thing. So the company was founded by a bunch of rock star Silicon Valley technology guys who've been making hardware in the technology world for most of their lives, flat panels, laptops, cell phones, all stuff that's highly repetitive. And they said, why aren't we doing this with construction? Why can't we just repeat in construction? And so they went after it, and they raised a lot of money. But as I told Michael yesterday, if you're a person that has never swung a framing hammer or probably changed their own oil or any number of other things, construction related, you're probably not the guy that's going to, tectonically disrupt the entire industry across the planet. And so, those of us that had certain skills were brought in, but we weren't really cut loose to do what we needed to do. And there were just too many people, and it was too complex and too distributed, and too hung up on margins. And, every time there was a problem, instead of addressing the problem, they'd hire 3 more people. So you went with a problem that 5 people were grappling with, and then you got 3 newcomers come in. Now your group's up to 8. And then it just gets distributed between 5 different offices where everybody's working remotely, and it just became a juggernaut of complexity and inefficiency, and with respect to the timber, the notion that Katerra was going to deliver this completely vertically integrated solution where we design the building, we engineer the building, we fabricate the building, we ship it, we install it, and we're the GC for the entire project. That's a lovely fantasy, but just emerging as a company that can do that across the entire nation, it just doesn't happen that way. And so a lot of the fundamental models had to be shifted to be more of a third party provider. Sort of the best example that I have is Mortensen, big GC, built Viking Stadium here, came to me at the very early days, this would have been in July of 2018, and said, "Hey, Pete, we know who you are. We know you're at Katerra. We've got a really easy one for you because we've already designed and engineered a building in mass timber. All we need is 200,000 square feet of your 5-ply delivered with a glulam package to Phoenix, Arizona." So in my world, that's an absolute dream order, right? There is no engineering, there's no project management, there's nothing but make the panels and ship them down. Well, Katerra figured out 57 reasons why that was never going to happen because it wasn't a Katerra job. So I had to explain, and I didn't make a lot of friends explaining this to, these founders, that model was deeply flawed, that was the easiest sale you could ever make in the mass timber world. And so I was charged with pivoting and restructuring it so that, yeah, if Michael Green is designing these beautiful buildings and Equilibrium and Robert Malchuk is engineering it, these are the companies that we acquired to do this, that's fine, but you're never going to fill up a 185,000 cubic meter factory with one architect and one engineer sending all the projects down. It's just never going to work. Never, ever, ever are you going to produce that much. If you look at that dormitory I showed you, that was 4,000 cubes for one project, and the capacity of this thing is somewhere around 185,000. So it was just totally incongruent. So by the time we pivoted, we had lost a lot of jobs. We were expensive because they were hung up on margins that just don't exist in the wood industry, and we'd gotten a bad rap. And other capacity had come online, and the Europeans were stepping on the gas. In the old days before we had capacity, we were importing from the Europeans, and we sort of created a monster because now they're here, not only selling aggressively across the country, but they're also shipping commodity dimension lumber over, particularly during the pinch that we just went through. And I can't speak to the other divisions, the other factories of Katerra, but it was essentially the same thing. Was the execution was extremely difficult, more complex, and much slower than what they anticipated, and they got into a lot of trouble and a lot of hot water.
Do you see Katerra potentially being the Napster of the CLT industry, where they plowed the street and failed at the end, and now it's going to get filled in with successful players?
Yeah, I mean, I think Katerra was actually great for the industry because you have to remember that, Nordique and Structurlam and SmartLam, I mean, those companies got started, 15 years ago. And so what Katerra did was came in and kind of blew the lid off the volcano with marketing, and created this huge increased awareness, exponential increase in awareness of mass timber through the major horsepower of their marketing machine. So ironically, when I got done and everybody started calling me, they said, it's funny because we really love Katerra because you've done so much marketing, but you really didn't do very many jobs. I mean, the 2 jobs I showed you were the 2 biggest mass timber jobs that we did. I was only able to pull off 2. And remember, we didn't produce glulam, so I had to basically work with competitors on subbing out the glulam package with our CLT, which is extraordinarily difficult, as you might imagine.
So when we talked yesterday, we were trying to come up with things that would matter to the audience listening now. And the one thing you talked about was this challenge you have of making a building in the factory, but getting it erected properly. How do you see that as an opportunity for existing lumber, dealer lumber, someone in the wood space already?
Yeah, so I thought about that because you talked about, that Wisconsin distributor with 8 yards and he'd never heard of it. And I told you it didn't surprise me because it's just not, it's not in his wheelhouse. It's not a commodity. But so there's 2 points to that question. One is the installation. So we've seen the advent of Swinnerton recognizing the opportunity, a major Northwest GC, and starting a wholly owned subsidiary called TimberLab. And at a great time, because when Katerra imploded, they snatched up a whole bunch of the Mass Timber folks from Katerra and brought them in. And so there are some big and then smaller regional players ramping up to respond to the demand for installation. So that's getting better. That was not easy in the old days. We'd have to call timber framers and educate them, and it was a rough path. So the installation bottleneck is being addressed. Swinnerton / TimberLab is the installer for Walmart. They were probably the only real candidate that could have the kind of horsepower that you would need for a campus of that scope and scale. So the second point is, what can these dealers do? I don't know. Like we talked about Scott Stevens at Mogitech, right? So I approached him about supporting ADM doing the fabrication at his site because we didn't have any room at the factory and we didn't have any room at the job site. And he provided the site, the tools, the manpower to prefabricate a lot of the connections on the GluLams in particular. And now he's gotten into, people are coming to him saying, hey, we want a core and a shaft in CLT, but we're going to frame the building, and you guys seem to be in the mix. And all of a sudden he's in the mix, and they're very interested. They're trying to nurture it. So a guy like that is then calling me and saying, hey, I've got this project in Virginia. We're going to do the framing, but we want to do a hybrid with CLT. So that's an example of sort of an outsider that's in the wood business, all of a sudden getting involved in CLT and seeing an opportunity.
So you're talking, say, a 6-story multifamily unit that has elevators. You CLT up the shaft and then build everything around it.
Or use it as the floor system if that can work. But I think the shafts and cores are a really cool opportunity. They are more expensive, and if you're doing a precast, then it's the speed is not as much of a value. But if it's a reinforced CMU block or something that's just, or cast and poured in place, that's really slow and typically inaccurate. You think about how fast you can take a 50-foot panel that's 50 feet long, stand it on its end, and now you've got 5 stories in a 15-minute crane pick, and then you screw another panel, you got 3 sides of a shaft, then you drop in your prefabbed staircases and then button the thing up. In one day, you've got a 5-story core and shaft erected. There's some work to be done with those. The engineering gets a little hairy, the connections are heavy and beefy, but the more we do, the more we will do, because we'll get better at it, and the engineers will get better at how you put them together. But one thing that I'm interested in, and this is the slide I'm showing right now, this is just a very simple, what I would call an accessory dwelling unit that, as you might imagine, in today's world are extremely popular, right? If you have a piece of dirt, good luck finding an architect, an engineer, a GC, doing the whole thing the old-fashioned way. When I could ship 25, CNC'd CLT panels to a shop with a kit of parts and a bill of materials, put this thing together in 3 or 4 days in a shop, throw it on a truck and tie it in a couple hours, and it's turnkey. And so, this is what I learned in Europe on my last trip with Walmart, was that as much as 50% of the CLT that's going out the door is going into prefab and modular shops. That's a significant volume. That really perked my ears up, because 50% of the European output is a lot. And so I think that's part of what's next here. And so how can others get involved in this? Well, anyone who can build now could potentially build this, and anyone who's thinking about embracing or looking into offsite construction as a part or all of their future, then here's a really easy way to get your feet wet. And I've got an order for 100 of these in Montana, but I have nowhere to build them, and I have to figure out the whole supply chain and the last mile and all that.
So let's talk about that supply chain real quick, because I think that's something that could be a curveball for the lumber industry. You know, it takes a lot of fiber to build a CLT panel. Do you see a run on lumber as CLT gains traction?
It would have to be, I mean, the original FP innovation study, this is really jogging my memory, but I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast, but sometimes these numbers stick in my head. I think at 5 to 15% market acceptance in the typologies where it made sense, it was 800 million to 2.4 billion board feet per year in North America. To put that in, well, I mean, I don't have to put it in context for this audience. That doesn't move the needle for the combined sawmilling infrastructure for, you know, for North America. It's taken the Europeans, let's say, just 20 years to get to 2 million cubic meters, and there's 424 board feet in a cubic meter. So do the math on 2 million times 424. That's taken 20 years to get there. So I just don't, you know, and if you look at the, let's see, I think I've got a wood basket in here. If you look at, you know, the wood baskets, like my Arkansas soundbite, you know, 3 hours to regrow those buildings. So here's the Ontario wood basket, right? The little blue dot at, you know, 7 o'clock there is the hectares of harvested annual trees out of that whole wood basket, 71 million hectares. So it would, and you can only have so many CLT plants, right? Because you got to be sitting right on top of your fiber to have a plant. Now, you know, Michael, I mentioned yesterday, you seem to be aware of this, that Binder had bought 2 significant sawmills in the Southeast, the Klausner 1 and 2 in Florida and North Carolina. So Live Oak, I think that plant is a 700 million board foot Southern yellow pine sawmill. And that's before the Austrians get in there and make it as efficient as anything. So, you know, there's one group that'll have, you know, 1.5 billion board feet of capacity with 2 sawmills. So I just think that, you know, there may be a few more CLT plants. There's a little nano CLT plant in Durango. These guys are actually felling and drying their own trees because there's literally 0 sawmilling infrastructure in Colorado left.
Right.
And they're making 3-ply, you know, CLT, and they're selling it as fast as they can make it. So you might see some micro nano facilities pop up, but I just don't think there's much room for a whole lot more. There's been a lot of talk in New England. There's been talk in Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin. Now you've got Arkansas covered. You've got the Southeast covered with SmartLam. The Northwest is pretty dense with supply chain now. You got 2, 3 Canadian operations. You got the Europeans coming. There's just not too many more places for it.
Can we pivot real quick? I know you're pretty keen on Glulam. Do you see applications for Glulam where they will displace some of the engineered products that are currently in tight demand or in tight supply, high demand?
Yeah, so the Glulam is really interesting. Everybody sort of keeps underestimating the importance of Glulam. You know, Katerra didn't even choose to manufacture it, which was just a horrendous oversight. You know, Element5 sort of, it was a secondary thought, and they're already realizing that they don't have enough capacity. So what I've seen is that, you know, Glulam is sort of enjoying its own renaissance right now, partly by virtue of the advent of mass timber. And so I've had many projects come my way that there's not a splinter of CLT, but you know, it's a $10 million glulam order for, you know, curved beams and massive, you know, columns and beams. And the glulam manufacturing here is pretty archaic. The big boys just do the stock beams, but all these projects are one-offs and they're, you know, they're specialized dimensions. And so nobody really has a really full-blown advanced automated, what I'll call a European style glulam line running, which I think is a significant opportunity. I've talked to some people who are saying, are we missing out on glulam? And the answer is yes, because I think you could run, you know, I can buy glulam from Europe for 20% cheaper than I can get it here, regardless of the recent spike. And it's, you know, arguably a nicer, more refined product with full-blown fabrication rather than having to send it to 3 people here to do the fabrication work. So I think there is an opportunity for glulam, and there's obviously another channel for consuming a lot of wood. As I told you, E5 is struggling with procurement of the MSR, which I don't have time to understand why that's a problem when you have a wood basket like this and you have sawmills not too far away. But you know, right now that's a problem. But yeah, I think you could run a facility for glulam that supported mass timber projects and just did its own glulam as well.
Excellent. So let's wrap it up. But I think what I come out of this with is, you know, the CLT construction style is a friend to the lumber industry, not a foe. But it has to be approached in the right manner. You know, if you think you're just going to roll out of a stick frame multi-family building into a CLT, you're probably naive. There's a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, and you know, as I told you yesterday, Canfor sort of hatched this whole scheme just as a way to sell more lumber, and therefore they helped write the manufacturing standards so that the mills didn't have to change anything that they're doing, but they can sell a whole lot more, you know, lumber. But they were very conscientious of not cannibalizing light wood frame construction. And yeah, I understand that, but I also think it's short-sighted because that is now the huge underserved market, is people who want to do single family housing or developments, or like those Manta units. That developer took one look at those and said, I'll take 100. And so I think it's short-sighted. I don't think you're ever going to cannibalize the light wood frame market. So I think to systematically say, oh no, we can't ever support any light wood frame residential is silly, but I don't ever see it cannibalizing. I see it only adding more volume for the mills for sure.
Excellent. So wrap it up with one last question. You know, what does Pete see that the rest of the world doesn't? I mean, we've already gone through the whole presentation is that, but 5 years from now, what's your vision on construction?
I hope to be out of it. I don't like construction. I built a lot of stuff. I told you I used to build and run breweries, and it was always just such a nightmare. Even being on the client side as the owner, I was like, why is construction such a shit show every time? I realize these breweries are complicated, but just putting up a shell every time was such a headache. So I think what's next is what I've already mentioned. I think further embracing of value-added prefabrication and continuing to reduce the construction schedule and roll up more scope into a more vertically integrated supplier or partner. I think that's a big part of the future. If you look at what we did at the Catalyst building in Spokane, there's a lot of stuff on the website about Catalyst Spokane, net zero energy, prefabrication. I think that's a big part of the future. That's where I want to focus. And then I want to focus on replicable typologies. So start with the ADUs. We can make those over and over and over, and then graduate into workforce housing, same units, highly repetitive, smaller boutique hotels, same units over and over. So I think that's one. And then hopefully, you know, the arrival of complementary products like wood fiber insulation, right? We should be making wood fiber insulation out here. You could take every one of those beetle kill trees in Colorado and just put it into a chip and make wood fiber insulation like Styco, Gutex, Homoterm. All these guys have, but we can't ship it across the country. So I'm hoping that more, you know, wood-based complementary products emerge. And there's some rumbling that that's happening, but it's a big
cool, you know, what you're saying basically is we're going to take this resource we have called fiber or a log tree and make something other than lumber and paper out of it. We're going to turn it into a little more sophisticated product. But,
yeah, I mean, the Swedes they graduated from CLT and went back to LVL, and now LVL is enjoying this renaissance because Sidewalk Labs has determined that LVL and mass plywood is a better return on the log, and it is, because it's if you can peel it, you're going to get a better return than trying to make sticks out of a round log. So when you see, you know, Sidewalk Labs committing, probably with Boise Cascade, to LVL and mass plywood, that's a whole nother renaissance that a new and an old product are going to have when they come together. But I've been working with these Swedes who started using CLT to make wind turbine towers in using small blocks, because, you know, steel, you got to transport these steel towers. It's a nightmare. We've all seen it. They graduated very quickly into a curved LVL product, and they're knocking out a 50-meter wind turbine tower with cupped you know, LVL pieces that just go together like Lego blocks. So I think you're going to see a lot of innovation of both the older engineered wood products and the newer ones like CLT, DLT, NLT. All that stuff is going to, I think, continue to evolve.
cool. Pete, thank you so much. This was a major brain dump. A lot to take in here. I love it.
Yeah, you know, each one of these slides I could tell a story for an hour on and go off on tangents. So if there's more interest down the road, just, you know, give me a shout. But I'll keep sending people your way because I love what you're doing, and hopefully you can get our procurement squared away and make my life easier.
All right, that sounds good. If you want to get in
All
touch with Pete, you go on LinkedIn. You'll find him there, and he's at Element5 now. So thanks everyone. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Don't forget to fix Jory's computer.
I'll fix Jory's computer
Happy wife, happy life.
all day.